It was an ordinary Wednesday evening when Anthony pulled into the driveway of his suburban home. The sun had already sunk below the horizon, casting the neighborhood into shadow. He cut the engine of his sedan and grabbed the small paper bag on the passenger seat, a bouquet of flowers and a box of Samantha's favorite takeout pasta. He checked the time on his watch. 6:45 p.m., earlier than usual. A surprise dinner at home seemed perfect after the crazy work week he'd been having. Samantha had been distant lately, but Anthony had chalked it up to stress. Maybe this would cheer her up. Whistling softly, he slipped his key into the front door. As it swung open, Anthony was greeted by silence. Odd. Samantha usually left the TV running or music playing when she was home. "Sam?" he called out. No answer. He placed the food on the kitchen counter and loosened his tie. His gut told him something wasn't right, though he couldn't pinpoint what. Then he heard it. A faint laugh. A man's laugh. It was coming from the hallway, from their bathroom. Anthony frowned, his brow furrowing as he listened. His ears strained, catching another sound, a woman's voice, Sam's voice, giggling. "Thanks for last night, babe," came a voice that made the hair on Anthony's neck stand up. He froze in place, his mind taking a few moments to process the words. It was Jacob's voice, his brother. "You really know how to keep a guy satisfied," Jacob continued, his tone dripping with smugness. "Same time tomorrow?" Anthony's heart pounded, so hard it drowned out everything else. His legs felt rooted to the floor as if cement had poured into his shoes. Then Samantha's voice chimed in, light and flirty, with that cruel laugh he'd never heard before. "Of course, hon. You got everything I've been craving. Size, stamina, and the guts to actually use them." Anthony gripped the edge of the counter so tightly his knuckles went white. What the hell was this? And then something snapped in him. He started moving, his footsteps deliberate and heavy against the wood floors. Each step closer to the hallway amplified his anger. He felt like he was walking through a fog. Every sound became sharper, more distinct, the running water, their laughter, his own blood roaring in his ears. The bathroom door opened just as he reached it. Jacob stepped out first, shirtless and grinning like he'd won a trophy. His wet hair dripped water onto the floor. Behind him, Samantha's figure appeared, wrapped in nothing but Anthony's towel. She leaned against the doorframe, smirking. Jacob's eyes landed on Anthony, and his grin widened. He didn't look guilty, not even a little. Instead, he winked and said with a sickening confidence, "Hey, bro, didn't think you'd be home early." Anthony's jaw clenched, and his fists balled at his sides. "What the hell is this?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Samantha giggled again, stepping forward. "Oh, come on, Anthony. Don't look so shocked. You didn't actually think you could keep me satisfied, did you?" Anthony's gaze darted between the two of them, his brain still catching up to what his eyes were seeing. His brother, standing there half-naked like he owned the place. His wife, mocking him like it was all some kind of joke. Jacob snorted and shrugged. "Hey man, maybe you should take notes. Some guys just know how to treat a woman," and that was it. Anthony's vision tunneled. Before he realized what he was doing, his body moved on its own. In one furious motion, he lunged at Jacob and swung his fist. The impact was sickening. Jacob's head snapped back, and his body staggered into the hallway wall. A strangled grunt escaped his lips as blood spurted from his mouth. "Jesus, Anthony!" Jacob shouted, clutching his face as he slumped to the ground. "What the fuck?" Samantha shrieked, but Anthony barely heard her. He stepped toward Jacob, grabbing him by the collar of his damp jeans and yanking him upright. "You think this is funny, you bastard? You think you can come into my house and do this?" Jacob tried to speak through his bloodied teeth. "It's not my fault your wife wanted a real man." The words sealed his fate. Anthony's fist collided with Jacob's face again, and this time, there was an audible crack. Jacob howled as he crumpled to the floor, his hands flying up to his mouth. Anthony's chest heaved, his knuckles stinging, but he didn't stop. "Anthony, stop it!" Samantha screamed, grabbing at his arm. "You're gonna kill him!" He whirled on her, fury burning in his eyes. Don't you dare speak to me right now. Don't you dare!" Samantha stumbled backward, her face paling. "It's not what you think," she stammered, tears welling up. Anthony let out a bitter laugh. Not what I think. You were laughing about it 5 seconds ago. He gestured at Jacob, who groaned on the floor, blood dripping between his fingers. You brought him, my own brother, into our bed? Into my fucking house? Samantha tried to step forward again, reaching for him. Anthony, please. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? Anthony barked. You mocked me to my face. Size, stamina, and guts, huh? That didn't sound like nothing. Jacob coughed from the ground, spitting blood onto the hardwood. You're such a drama queen, Anthony, he sneered weakly. She just wanted what you couldn't give her. Anthony's fury reignited, and he kicked Jacob square in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. Jacob gasped and writhed, curling up into himself. You don't speak. You don't get to talk to me, Anthony snarled. Samantha screamed again, stepping between them. Stop it. Enough. Anthony's chest rose and fell as he glared at her. Get out. What? She choked out, her hands trembling. I said get out. Both of you. Samantha's face twisted, anger flashing behind her tears. You can't just kick me out. This is my house, too. Anthony strode to the hallway closet and pulled out a bag. He threw it at her feet. Pack your shit and take him with you before I do something I'll regret. Samantha didn't move. She looked at him like he was a stranger. Anthony, please. Can we talk about this? There's nothing to talk about, Anthony said coldly. You laughed in my face. You didn't even have the decency to hide it. Now get out. Jacob groaned as he tried to sit up, wiping blood from his swollen mouth. This is fucked up, man. She's not even worth it. Anthony's hand twitched, but he held himself back. You're lucky you're still breathing. He turned to Samantha, his voice ice cold. I want you out of here. You have 5 minutes. If you're not gone, I'm calling the cops and telling them you broke in. Samantha looked stricken, tears streaming down her face. Anthony, I'm sorry. I swear, I don't care. She opened her mouth to say something else, but Anthony turned away. He grabbed his keys and walked out the front door, slamming it behind him. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. He leaned against his car, his head spinning. The sound of shouting, Samantha yelling at Jacob, Jacob swearing back, filtered through the walls. Anthony stared at the night sky, his fists still trembling. How could this happen? How did it come to this? A few minutes later, he heard the front door creak open. Samantha and Jacob emerged, Samantha clutching a hastily packed bag and Jacob limping, his face swollen and bloodied. Neither of them looked at Anthony as they climbed into Jacob's car and drove off into the night. For the first time in years, the house was silent. Anthony stood there, alone, staring at the empty driveway. His heart ached, but the anger had dulled into something else, cold, hollow resignation. It's over, he thought. Whatever this was, it's over. And yet, deep down, he knew the storm was only beginning. The house was quiet, too quiet. Anthony sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if the answers were buried in the cracks of the wood. His knuckles were still raw from punching Jacob earlier, and the ache throbbed like a pulse, a constant reminder of what had happened. He hadn't even bothered to clean up the streaks of blood on his hands. It was past midnight, but sleep wasn't an option. The bed behind him felt foreign, contaminated. Samantha's scent lingered in the sheets, mingling with the faint smell of Jacob's cheap cologne that made his stomach twist. He thought about changing the sheets or even sleeping on the couch, but he didn't move. He stared straight ahead into nothingness. The events of the evening replayed in his mind like a broken reel, over and over again. Jacob's smug grin, Samantha's cruel laughter, size, stamina, and guts. The words echoed in his skull, drilling deeper every time. His hand clenched into a fist involuntarily. How long had this been going on? Months? Years? How many times had his wife, invited his own brother into their bed? A sudden anger surged through him, hot and suffocating, but it fizzled out just as quickly. Now there was only emptiness. He stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back slightly to look out. The night outside was dark and still. The driveway was empty, no sign of Samantha or Jacob. They were gone now, probably licking their wounds and feeling sorry for themselves. Good, Anthony muttered under his breath. He let the curtain fall back and sat down again, this time on the armchair across the room. He leaned back and closed his eyes, but rest didn't come. Instead, his mind drifted, uninvited, to the past, back to the days before everything fell apart. He could still see her standing at the altar, wearing that simple white dress she had loved so much. Her smile had been bright, and her eyes had shone with something close to magic. Anthony remembered how his hands had trembled when he placed the ring on her finger. "Do you promise to love and cherish her, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," he had said without hesitation, meaning every word. He thought she had too. Their first child had been born 2 years later. Samantha had screamed at him during the delivery, cursing him for doing this to her. But the moment they placed the baby in her arms, she cried. They both did. Anthony had never felt so proud. Those first years had been hard, long nights, diapers, unpaid bills, but they had worked through it together. They had been a team. He had trusted her completely. Jacob had always been there. Growing up, they were inseparable. Jacob was the reckless one, always jumping off rooftops and pushing limits while Anthony played it safe. After their parents died, Anthony had felt responsible for him. "I'll look out for you," he'd promised when they were teenagers. "We're brothers. We stick together." And Jacob had looked up to him. Or so Anthony thought. A bitter laugh escaped Anthony's lips. Brothers stick together. What a joke. The memories grew darker. Samantha pulling away from him over the years. Little things at first, forgetting to kiss him goodbye in the morning, avoiding his touch in bed. Then the excuses. "I'm working late again. Book club ran longer than I thought. I'm too tired tonight." Anthony had ignored the warning signs. He'd told himself it was just a phase. Every marriage went through ups and downs. He'd been patient, believing that Samantha would come back to him, that things would get better. Then Jacob had started visiting more often. He should have known. Anthony opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling, his face expressionless. His grief, which had felt so sharp earlier, had dulled into something else. It wasn't pain anymore. It was clarity. He stood up and walked to the kitchen. The food he'd brought home earlier sat untouched on the counter. He opened the takeout box, looked at the pasta inside, and then threw the entire thing in the trash. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe because the meal felt like a cruel joke now. Another reminder of how he'd tried, how hard he'd tried, to hold on to something that was already broken. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring at the empty space where Samantha usually stood when they talked. "What a fool I've been," he muttered. The realization came slowly, like a dawn breaking over the horizon. Samantha's betrayal wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident or a lapse in judgment. It was a choice, a deliberate, cold-hearted choice. She had laughed about it in his face. She had mocked him, humiliated him. And Jacob, the brother he had loved and protected, had stabbed him in the back. Anthony's hand tightened around the glass. "I'll let them do this. I'll let them make a fool out of me." His grief hardened into resolve. He wouldn't let them get away with it. Not Samantha. Not Jacob. They had taken everything from him, his trust, his love, his pride, and they had done it without remorse. Samantha hadn't even tried to lie or deny it. She had smirked, as though his pain was amusing. "I'll show them," Anthony said quietly. The idea hit him like a jolt of lightning. Revenge. A clear, calculated revenge that would destroy both of them. He wouldn't do something reckless. He wouldn't stoop to their level, but he would make sure they felt the full weight of what they had done. He set the glass down and wiped his hands on a dish towel. Then, with deliberate movements, he grabbed his laptop from the living room and brought it to the kitchen table. His mind was already spinning with ideas. The house, the accounts, the kids, he had leverage. He just had to play his cards right. He opened his bank account online and stared at the numbers on the screen. The joint account he shared with Samantha. The savings. The mortgage. She's not getting a dime of this. Then he checked the kids' school schedules. He would take them somewhere safe, his sister's house in another town. Samantha wouldn't know where to look. As he scrolled through documents and accounts, he felt something inside him shift. He wasn't sad anymore. He wasn't even angry. He was focused, determined. For the first time all night, Anthony felt a sense of control. Hours passed. At some point, he realized the sky outside was lightening. Dawn was creeping in through the kitchen window. He closed his laptop and stood up, stretching his stiff back. The house was still silent, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt empty, cleared out, like all the poison had been exposed, and all that was left was the quiet before something new. Anthony walked back to the bedroom and looked around. This house had once been a home, but now it felt like just another structure, walls, windows, and doors. There was nothing left here for him anymore. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His lawyer's name was there. He hesitated for only a moment before pressing call. "Hey, Wesley. It's Anthony. Yeah, I need to talk to you about a divorce." As he hung up the phone, Anthony glanced at the bed one last time. Samantha's side was empty. He smiled bitterly. "This is only the beginning," he said softly to himself. And with that, he walked out of the room, his steps steady and certain. The morning sun seeped through the cracks in the blinds, bathing the living room in an unwelcome golden glow. Anthony sat in the armchair, freshly showered and dressed, his mind sharp and clear. Samantha was still asleep upstairs in the guest room, curled up in the bed that now only seemed to represent betrayal. He listened to the faint hum of her breathing through the silence of the house. For the first time in years, Anthony felt in control. Anthony grabbed his phone and opened the banking app. Their joint account sat there like an open invitation. "Time to even the score," he murmured. With steady fingers, he transferred every last dollar into his personal account. The numbers on the screen shifted, and Anthony felt an odd satisfaction settle over him. Samantha's credit card, which was linked to the same account, would decline the moment she tried to swipe it. Next, he picked up the phone and called his realtor, Jenna. "Hey, Jenna, it's Anthony. Yeah, I know it's sudden, but I need to sell the house immediately. I want it listed by tonight." "Anthony, are you sure?" "This place is. I'm sure," Anthony interrupted firmly. "List it below market value. I want it gone fast. No delays." She hesitated, but eventually agreed. "All right, I'll get the paperwork started." Quietly, Anthony climbed the stairs and stepped into his kids' rooms. The two of them were still asleep, tangled in their blankets. His heart tightened as he watched them, their peaceful faces oblivious to the storm brewing around them. He crouched beside his daughter, Ellie, and shook her gently. "Hey, kiddo, time to wake up." She stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy? It's Saturday. Why are we up?" Anthony smiled softly. "We're going on a little adventure. Get dressed, okay? Pack your favorite things. We're going to visit Aunt Hannah for a while." "Really? Is Mommy coming?" she asked innocently. "No, sweetheart. It's just us today." She frowned, but didn't argue, too excited by the idea of an adventure. Anthony moved to his son's room and repeated the same. Within minutes, the kids were packed and ready, carrying small backpacks stuffed with toys, clothes, and the little things they couldn't live without. Before heading out, Anthony walked back to the kitchen, where he had laid out the divorce papers neatly on the counter. His lawyer had been quick. Wesley was efficient when it came to situations like this. Anthony stared at the stack of papers for a moment before scribbling a brief note on top. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Don't contact me. I've taken the kids. You'll hear from my lawyer." He set his wedding ring next to the note, the dull band looking worthless now. It wasn't a symbol of love anymore, just a shackle he was finally free of. He glanced around the house one last time. It had been their home once, filled with laughter and dreams. Now, it was just a hollow structure where his wife had betrayed him, where his brother had mocked him. Anthony grabbed the kids' hands and led them to the car. Samantha didn't stir until well past noon. She rolled over lazily, stretching her arms before reaching for her phone. It was dead. Grumbling, she plugged it in and walked downstairs. "Anthony," she called out, yawning. "Are you home?" The silence struck her first. Something felt off. She stepped into the kitchen and froze. The stack of papers on the counter caught her eye. Divorce papers. Her heart stopped as she read the note. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Panic set in. Samantha snatched her phone off the charger, only to realize her bank app had sent multiple notifications, one after another, about failed charges. Her stomach sank. She opened the app, only to see the joint account drained. No, 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 she screamed, her voice echoing through the empty house. Her shaking hands dialed Anthony's number, but the call didn't go through. She tried again. Same result. Her voice cracked as she muttered to herself, "He blocked me?" She stormed through the house, shouting Anthony's name as though he might magically appear. "This isn't funny. You can't just take the kids." She ran outside, barefoot, her eyes wild as she scanned the driveway. The car was gone. Samantha sat on the living room floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She felt like the walls were closing in. How had this happened? Just last night, she had felt invincible. Anthony was always so mild-mannered, boring, even. She never thought he'd have the guts to actually leave. Her phone rang suddenly. It was Jacob. She swiped to answer, her voice trembling. "Jacob, he's gone," she blurted. "He took everything. The money, the kids, the house is being sold. He left me." Jacob sighed heavily on the other end. "What do you mean? He took the money? How much?" "All of it," she shrieked. "What are we going to do?" "I have nothing." "Calm down," Jacob snapped, though there was clear frustration in his voice. "We'll figure something out." "Figure something out?" Samantha yelled. "We're screwed. And it's your fault too. If you hadn't, don't blame me for this, Sam." Jacob cut her off sharply. "You were the one laughing at him last night. You pushed him too far." The line went dead as Jacob hung up on her. Samantha dropped the phone, tears streaming down her face. Jacob's life unraveled just as quickly as Samantha's. News of the affair spread through the family like wildfire. Their sister, Mia, was the first to call him. "You're disgusting, Jacob. How could you do that to Anthony?" "It wasn't like that." Jacob tried to argue, though his voice lacked conviction. "Oh, spare me your excuses. Mom and Dad would be ashamed of you," Mia spat before ending the call. From there, it only got worse. Friends stopped answering his calls. His co-workers whispered behind his back. His landlord handed him an eviction notice when Jacob couldn't make rent, his savings mysteriously depleted. Jacob tried calling Samantha again, hoping for sympathy. "We're in this together, Sam," he pleaded. But Samantha snapped, her voice ice cold. "I don't want to see you again, Jacob. This is your mess, too. You're the one who dragged me into it," he shouted, but the line went dead. Jacob stared at the phone in disbelief. Alone, humiliated, and toothless thanks to Anthony's punch, Jacob realized too late that he had burned every bridge. Meanwhile, Anthony sat in his sister Hannah's cozy living room, watching Ellie and his son play with their cousins. The sound of their laughter was a balm to his soul. Hannah walked over and handed him a cup of coffee, her expression cautious. "You sure you're okay, Anthony?" she asked softly. "I'm better than okay," Anthony replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. Hannah studied him for a moment before nodding. "They don't deserve your anger, you know. People like that destroy themselves eventually." Anthony sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Oh, I know. I don't need to lift another finger. Samantha and Jacob are already sinking. What will you do next?" He looked out the window, the sun shining bright over the yard. "I'm going to focus on the kids. On myself. I lost a lot, but I'm not broken." For the first time in months, maybe years, Anthony felt free. Samantha and Jacob had made their choices. Now they would live with the consequences. And he would start over. The sun broke through the morning clouds as Anthony stood on the sidelines of a soccer field, watching his son dash across the grass. He clapped, cheering as the boy dribbled the ball skillfully past two defenders. "Go, go. Nice work, buddy." His daughter, Ellie, tugged at his sleeve, holding out a water bottle. "Daddy, can we get ice cream after?" Anthony grinned. "Only if you promise to cheer louder than me for your brother." "I'll cheer like a lion," she roared playfully. It was a simple moment, but one Anthony cherished. Life was calmer now, different but good. Moving to a new town had been the best decision he'd made. He'd built something solid, a small but comfortable house, a promising career, and most importantly, a peaceful home for his kids. After practice, the three of them stopped by the local ice cream parlor, where Athena worked part-time while running her own small business. "Hey, you three," Athena greeted, her smile warm and genuine as they stepped inside. "Hi, Miss Athena," Ellie chirped, darting toward the counter. Anthony nodded at her, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude for her presence in their lives. Athena was different, strong, kind, and thoughtful. She never pried into his past, respecting his boundaries while gently pushing him toward the present. She was slowly restoring something in him that he hadn't thought possible: trust. Chocolate for the lady. And what about you, champ? Athena asked Anthony's son. Strawberry swirl, he said, bouncing on his toes. Athena turned to Anthony, her teasing tone catching him off guard. And you, Mr. Serious? Let me guess, plain vanilla? Anthony smirked, leaning on the counter. You know me too well. I'm starting to, she replied softly, holding his gaze for a moment before turning to scoop the ice cream. Anthony felt his chest tighten, a mix of hope and unfamiliar nervousness. Athena wasn't Samantha. She was everything Samantha hadn't been. But trusting someone again? That was still a work in progress. That evening, after tucking the kids into bed, Anthony sat on the back porch with a beer, enjoying the cool breeze. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, and he frowned at the unknown number flashing on the screen. He almost ignored it, but something urged him to pick up. Hello. There was a pause. Then, a voice he hadn't heard in 3 years. Weak. Shaky. Anthony, it's me. Samantha. His jaw tightened, fingers curling around the phone. He didn't say anything, letting her sit in the silence she deserved. Please, Anthony, don't hang up. What do you want? His voice was flat, devoid of warmth. She took a shaky breath. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I didn't know who else to call. I've lost everything. Anthony stared out into the dark yard, her words bouncing off the walls of his mind. He could hear it in her voice. She wasn't the smug, cruel woman who'd smirked at him all those years ago. She was broken now, and it was hard to feel anything for her but disdain. I don't care, he replied bluntly. Anthony, please, Samantha pleaded. Jacob's gone. He left me a year ago. Took what little I had left. I've been scraping by, living in shelters, working minimum wage jobs. I'm not the same person anymore. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Anthony shot back. You think you can call me after all these years, and I'll just forgive you? Her voice cracked. I'm not asking for that. I don't know what to do anymore. I've hit rock bottom. I made a terrible mistake. Please, Anthony, you were always the better person. I'm so sorry. Anthony let out a bitter laugh. Sorry? You're sorry now? When I walked in on you and Jacob, you laughed in my face. You mocked me. Now, because your life is in shambles, you're suddenly sorry. I didn't know what I was doing, she cried, desperation leaking into every word. I was selfish. I was stupid. I see that now. You were a good man, and I threw you away. Please, Anthony, if there's anything, there's nothing. He cut her off coldly. You had everything once, Samantha. A husband who loved you, kids who adored you, a home. You threw it all away for a cheap thrill. She sobbed on the other end. I deserve that. I do. But, Anthony, I haven't seen the kids in 3 years. Please, let me see them. Just once. A flash of anger flared in Anthony's chest. The kids? You want to see them? After what you did? Do you know how many nights they cried, asking why you weren't there? How I had to pick up the pieces you shattered? I'm their mother, Samantha whispered brokenly. You stopped being their mother the moment you chose Jacob, Anthony snapped. You don't get to come back now, begging for scraps of a family you abandoned. The line went silent. Anthony could hear her faint, ragged breathing. Finally, she said quietly, you're right. I don't deserve them. I don't deserve anything. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. Anthony's grip on the phone loosened. For a moment, he considered what to say, but he realized there was nothing left between them, nothing worth saving. Goodbye, Samantha. He hung up and set the phone on the table, staring at it as though it might come to life. The anger simmered inside him, but it wasn't the uncontrollable rage he'd felt years ago. It was calmer now, resolved. The next morning, Anthony met Athena for coffee at a small diner in town. She noticed his quiet mood immediately. Something on your mind? She asked softly, setting her cup down. Anthony hesitated before speaking. I got a call from my ex-wife last night. Athena blinked, but didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. She's hit rock bottom, Anthony explained. She's alone, broke, and begging for forgiveness. It's like hearing from a ghost. How did that make you feel? Athena asked, her tone careful. Angry at first, Anthony admitted. But then, I don't know. I realized I don't care anymore. Her life isn't my problem. I've moved on. Athena smiled faintly. That's a big thing to realize. Anthony looked at her, studying her thoughtful expression. 3 years ago, I thought I'd never trust anyone again. I thought my life was over. But sitting here now, I don't know. Maybe things turned out exactly how they were supposed to. Athena's smile widened. Maybe they did. Back in the city, Samantha sat alone on a park bench, clutching a worn-out coat around her shoulders. The air was cold, biting at her skin, but she hardly noticed. She stared at her phone, hoping Anthony would call back, but she knew he wouldn't. She thought about the house they'd shared, the family they'd built, and the man she had mocked so cruelly. She'd traded it all for a moment of excitement, a moment she'd regretted every single day since. Jacob had left her with nothing, just as Anthony said he would. Samantha had no job, no home, no family willing to take her in. She was a pariah. As she watched mothers walk by with their children, her heart ached with longing. She would never be that woman again, the one with a family, with children who trusted her. She had thrown it all away, and now she had to live with that choice. Later that night, Anthony stood on the porch again, watching the kids chase fireflies in the yard. Ellie laughed as she cupped one in her hands, holding it up for her brother to see. Athena stepped out onto the porch, standing beside Anthony. "You look happy," she said quietly. "I am," Anthony replied, his gaze never leaving the kids. For the first time in a long time, Athena slipped her hand into his, and Anthony let her. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. For once, the past was exactly where it belonged, behind him. The cheap motel room smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke. A loud, grating snore came from the other side of the room where Jacob lay sprawled on the lumpy bed, shirtless and reeking of sweat. Samantha sat at the small table near the window, staring at her reflection in the cracked glass. Her once pristine blonde hair was limp and dull. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and the hollow look in her face made her unrecognizable. She traced her fingertip along the condensation of an empty whiskey bottle as a familiar wave of regret washed over her. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The first few months after Jacob and Samantha left Anthony's life had been filled with false euphoria. Jacob had promised her excitement, adventure, and a new beginning. "We don't need anyone, Sam," he'd said. "We'll make it big on our own." It hadn't taken long for reality to hit. Jacob's charm, which had once felt magnetic, turned hollow when he couldn't hold down a job. After his fallout with the family, no one wanted anything to do with him. His unemployment stretched on, and the bitterness took root. "You think you're so much better than me, huh?" Jacob had slurred one night after too many drinks. "Don't give me that look, Sam. You're here too." At first, Samantha had tried to keep things together, working temp jobs, paying rent on dingy apartments, but the stress piled on, and Jacob's drinking grew worse. The man who had once smirked at her in Anthony's shower now spent most of his time unconscious on their couch or yelling at her when he was awake. One particularly miserable evening, Jacob came home with a six-pack and half-empty bottle of cheap rum. Samantha was already curled up on their thin mattress, pretending to be asleep, but Jacob slammed the door so hard the walls shook. "You're useless," he shouted, his words slurred. "You said you'd make life better with me. Look at us now." "Huh? Look where you got us." Samantha sat up, her temper finally snapping. "Where I got us? You're the one who promised me the world, Jacob. You said we'd build something together. But you can't even get off the couch to look for a job." Jacob staggered closer, pointing a trembling finger at her. "I gave up everything for you, Samantha. My family, my brother. And you're standing there blaming me?" His words stung. Samantha turned her face to the wall as tears spilled down her cheeks. "You didn't give up anything for me," she said quietly. "We destroyed ourselves, Jacob." Days turned into months. Samantha's world shrank to the size of the motel room they now shared. Her temp jobs couldn't pay for much, and Jacob's drinking habits drained what little money she brought in. He'd pawned his watch, his phone, and anything else of value. Samantha kept what few belongings she had hidden in her bag, terrified he'd sell them too. She often thought about leaving him, but where would she go? She had no friends, no family who would take her in. When she'd reached out to her sister a year ago, The response had been a cold, curt message. You chose Jacob over everyone. Don't call me again. She was trapped. One morning, Samantha woke to the sound of Jacob dry heaving in the tiny bathroom. She rolled over, the thin blanket barely keeping out the chill. She heard him curse and slam the toilet lid down before stumbling back into the room. You're disgusting, Samantha muttered, unable to keep the resentment from her voice. Jacob glared at her, his face pale and sweat slicked. What did you say? You heard me. She sat up, her anger simmering. You're a drunk. You're useless. This isn't a life, Jacob. We're rotting here. Jacob let out a bitter laugh and grabbed the empty bottle from the floor. He shook it sarcastically. Oh, I'm sorry, princess. Maybe Anthony will take you back if you bat your pretty eyes at him. That's what this is about, isn't it? You miss your golden boy. Samantha froze. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. For the first time in a long time, she whispered the truth out loud. I do. Jacob's smirk faded, replaced with something darker. He hurled the bottle at the wall, the glass shattering just inches from her head. Samantha didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. The universe seemed to mock her at every turn. Samantha often saw glimpses of Anthony's life through social media. Her one guilty pleasure when Jacob wasn't around to catch her. Anthony had moved on. His life was thriving in a way she never imagined. She stared at the pictures on her phone late at night, scrolling through the posts. In one photo, Anthony stood on a hiking trail, his arm draped around a woman, a stunning brunette with kind eyes and an easy smile. Samantha's chest twisted painfully. The caption read, "Couldn't have asked for a better partner on this journey." Another photo showed Anthony and the kids at a beach, building sandcastles under the sun. The kids had grown so much. Their smiles were bright, their faces filled with joy. Samantha's thumb hovered over the picture, tears burning in her eyes. They're happy, she whispered. Without me. It wasn't fair. But deep down, she knew she didn't deserve fairness. One particularly cold night, Samantha sat on the edge of the motel bed while Jacob lay passed out, snoring like a freight train. Her phone, cracked but still functional, sat in her lap. The screen was lit up with an old photo, one from years ago. It was from Anthony's birthday. He sat at the head of the dining table, laughing as the kids smashed cake into his face. Samantha remembered that night so clearly. She had been happy then, truly happy. How did I let this happen? She murmured, her voice breaking. She thought of Anthony, kind, patient Anthony, who had given her everything she could have asked for. She thought of Jacob's smirk in the shower. And she thought of the look on Anthony's face that day, how his entire world had shattered in front of her. Samantha pressed her face into her hands, sobbing quietly. I had a king, and I traded him for a fool. The words hung in the air, a bitter truth she could no longer ignore. Weeks later, Samantha sat on a park bench in the city, her only possession a tattered bag of clothes. Jacob had finally abandoned her, disappearing in the middle of the night with what little money they had left. She'd awoken to an empty room and a note scrawled on a napkin. You're on your own now. Don't call me. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man she'd chosen over Anthony had left her with less than nothing. As she sat in the park, watching families stroll by, a little girl ran past, giggling as she chased after her father. Samantha turned her head to follow the sound, tears welling up again. She imagined Ellie running like that, her tiny hands reaching for Anthony. She imagined Anthony turning, scooping her into his arms, and spinning her around with a smile. Samantha pressed her knuckles to her lips, choking back a sob. There was no redemption for her now. That night, Samantha curled up in a shelter cot, her stomach empty and her body aching from the cold. She stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying every mistake she'd made. She whispered to herself, over and over again, I had a king, and I traded him for a fool. The words offered no comfort, only the weight of regret, a weight she would carry forever. In the end, Anthony had won. He had built a life of joy, love, and success. Samantha, on the other hand, was a cautionary tale, one she couldn't rewrite. And as she closed her eyes, Samantha realized the cruelest part of all. She had destroyed herself. And there was no one left to blame. Anthony leaned back against the picnic table, watching his children run and play in the soft grass, their laughter ringing in the air. The sun was high, casting a warm glow on the park, and the world felt still, almost perfect. He looked at Athena, sitting beside him, her hand resting on his, her smile gentle. There was a peace in his heart now, a peace he hadn't known for a long time. It had been 3 years since the day his world had shattered, 3 years since he had discovered the betrayal that nearly destroyed him. He had spent the months following that day in a haze of anger and hurt, consumed by the need for revenge. He had set the world on fire, his wife, his brother, everything that had been his life. But now, looking at his children, laughing with Athena, the storm inside him had settled. Anthony's transformation wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming his life, taking back what had been stolen from him, not just his trust, but his happiness. 3 years ago, Anthony had been a different man. He had been broken, enraged, consumed by the idea of making those who wronged him pay. Samantha and Jacob had taken everything, his trust, his family, his sense of who he was. In the aftermath of the discovery, Anthony had been reduced to something he barely recognized. He had fought with Jacob, thrown him out, and made a choice: leave or lose everything. But even as he did it, part of him wondered if he would ever be the same. But slowly, he had healed. He had left everything behind: his house, his hometown, the life he had known for so long. In that escape, he had found himself again. The first step was realizing that revenge hadn't been enough. It had been necessary, but it hadn't been the end. He had expected satisfaction, a sense of closure, but instead, all he had felt was emptiness. There had been no joy in seeing Samantha beg, no peace in watching Jacob suffer. The only thing that had begun to fill the void was the love he had found in himself again. One day, as he was settling into his new life, Anthony had met Athena. She wasn't like Samantha. She didn't try to fix him or offer false promises. She was steady, reliable, and kind, a woman who understood him without needing to ask questions. They started as friends, bonding over their shared love of nature and their families. But slowly, their connection deepened. She never judged him for his past, and in return, Anthony let go of the walls he'd built so high around himself. Over the course of their relationship, Anthony had learned to trust again, to laugh again, to feel joy again. And as they sat together now, watching their kids chase each other with a soccer ball, Anthony realized that the life he had with Athena wasn't just a distraction. It was the life he had always deserved. "Dad, look, I scored," his son shouted, holding up the soccer ball triumphantly. Anthony smiled and waved at him, his heart swelling with pride. "You sure did, buddy. Good job," he called out, his voice full of warmth. Athena chuckled beside him. "He's growing up fast." "I know," Anthony replied. "Too fast." There was a moment of quiet between them, and Anthony looked at Athena. She was watching the kids too, but there was a softness to her expression. She had become part of his new world, a world that had begun to heal, bit by bit. "I never thought this would be my life again," Anthony said quietly, his voice laced with a touch of disbelief. "What do you mean?" Athena asked, turning to him with a concerned glance. "I mean, after everything," he paused, unsure how to put it into words. "I didn't think I would ever have this. Peace. Happiness. I was so consumed with anger, with the need to hurt them back. I thought revenge would fix me." Athena nodded, her expression understanding. "And did it?" Anthony shook his head. "No, it just made me bitter. I thought I was punishing them, but I was punishing myself. I lost so much of who I was in that fight. But then, slowly, it changed. I stopped fighting and started living." Athena squeezed his hand, giving him a soft smile. "And look at where you are now. This is the life you've built." Anthony watched as his children kicked the ball toward the goal. They were happy. He had given them the life they deserved, and in the process, he had found his own happiness. Just as Anthony was lost in the contentment of the moment, his phone buzzed. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. His breath hitched for a moment. The name on the caller ID made his heart skip. Samantha. He hadn't heard from her in 3 years. He hadn't expected to. The thought of her had faded into the background of his life, a mere echo. His first instinct was to ignore the call, to block it once again. He didn't need her to disrupt his peace. But then, something held him back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a lingering question he had never fully resolved. What did she want now? Why reach out after all this time? He answered the call with a steady voice. Samantha. There was a pause on the other end, and then her voice, fragile and raw, reached him. Anthony, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. Anthony's chest tightened. He could hear the desperation in her voice, but he steeled himself. It had been so long, and he wasn't the same man who had begged her to stay 3 years ago. What is it? Anthony replied, his tone even. I made a terrible mistake, Samantha said, her voice breaking. I was wrong. You were right about everything, and I ruined everything. There was silence, and then she continued, I have nothing left, Anthony. Jacob left me. I'm lost. Anthony exhaled slowly, his eyes moving to the horizon as his mind flickered back to the past. He saw her again, her face full of defiance and pride, mocking him in the kitchen that day. He thought of Jacob, his brother, who had betrayed him just as much. But most of all, Anthony thought about his children, how they were now far removed from the chaos that had once defined his life. He didn't feel the anger anymore. Only a quiet sadness for the woman who had once been his everything. You had everything once, Samantha, he said calmly, his voice devoid of bitterness. You threw it all away for a cheap thrill. Her voice wavered. I know, and I'm sorry. Please, I don't expect forgiveness. I needed you to know how sorry I am. Anthony took a deep breath. Samantha, it's too late. I've moved on. I've built a new life. A better life. One that's mine, without you, without him. He paused, his gaze drifting back to Athena, who was smiling at him now, her eyes full of understanding. Some betrayals are blessings in disguise, Samantha. And that's the truth. I'm happy now. I hope you find your peace, but I'm done. He didn't wait for her response. He hung up, staring at the phone for a moment, before slipping it back into his pocket. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer controlled him. As Anthony turned back to Athena, his heart was lighter. The call from Samantha, the past creeping in like a shadow, had been a reminder of how far he had come. It didn't define him anymore. The revenge, the betrayal, the pain, they were part of the story, but they were no longer the ending. He looked at his children, playing and laughing, and his heart swelled with pride. This was his future, a future he had fought for. Not through anger, but through the courage to rebuild. Anthony leaned back against the table, a smile tugging at his lips. Some betrayals are blessings in disguise, he muttered to himself, the words tasting sweeter now. And in that moment, he knew he was free,